Have you ever worked so hard to protect yourself from being hurt that you ended up hurting yourself more than anyone else ever could? Pause. This is the story of a man who built walls so high that not a single human being could climb them. A man who ran one of Seoul's most feared criminal empires, who had everything the world says a man should want, and had never, not once in 53 years, truly let anyone touch him. Not his rivals, not his subordinates, not the women who tried, until the last night of his life. Until a nurse named Amara walked into his hospital room carrying a thermos of warm water and absolutely no fear. Stay until the very end of this story, because the ending will change the way you think about what it means to be saved. Seoul does not sleep. It breathes. Neon light and exhaust fumes, rain on old rooftops, the sound of deals being made in back rooms that no newspaper will ever name. It is a city that rewards iron, discipline, the ability to look a man in the eye and feel nothing while you rearrange his world. Kang Min-jun had lived in Seoul's underworld for 37 years, and in that time, he had become the kind of man the city produces when it is feeling particularly ruthless. He was not physically imposing, not in the way that people imagine powerful men to be. He was lean and precise, with silver-streaked hair and the unhurried movements of someone who has never, in living memory, been rushed. His suits were tailored in a small shop in Cheongdam-dong by a tailor who had been making clothes for him since he was 31, and who never, not once, commented on the scarring on his left shoulder. He spoke quietly, always. He had learned at 19, the year he first stood in a room where real decisions were made, that the most dangerous men never need to raise their voices. Volume is panic. Silence is control. The organization he led had no official name. In the streets, the lower rank called it Cheonampa, the Iron Sky. In the corridors of city government, it had other names, spoken in whispers, with the particular care of people who understand that some things, once named aloud, become unavoidable. Min-jun himself used no name for it at all. Names, he had decided years ago, were how things got found. He had come to power at 31, inheriting command from a man named Woo Dae-ho, his mentor, his surrogate father, the one human being who had ever seen him as something other than what the street had made him. Woo had found him at 16, sleeping under a Han River overpass with 3,000 won and no plan. He had taken him in, educated him, shaped him into something sharp and patient and almost impossible to read. And before Woo died, he told him something that Min-jun had carried for 22 years like a stone in his chest. The moment you love someone, you hand them a knife. And most people, Min-juna, do not know what to do with a knife except cut. Min-jun took that lesson and built his entire architecture of living around it. He had associates, lieutenants who were loyal because he was fair and terrifying in equal measure. He had connections in law enforcement in City Hall. He had a penthouse in Gangnam with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city that he had, in some meaningful sense, helped shape. He had a collection of antique Celadon pottery, pale green, sea-colored, that he had spent 20 years gathering, piece by piece, from dealers who never asked why a man like him wanted old, fragile, beautiful things. What he did not have, what he had never allowed himself to have, is a single person who actually knew him. There had been women, he was not a man who denied himself everything, but they had remained at a careful distance, as if held there by glass he had installed himself. He was generous with them, courteous, and utterly unavailable in the way that matters. He never stayed past dawn. He never called back in the hope of something more. He never let the silence between himself and another person become the kind of silence that means something. He had made himself, in the deepest sense, untouchable. Not in the body. His body bore the ordinary damage of a difficult life, but in the place inside a person where intimacy lives, where vulnerability is housed, where another human being is allowed to put down their coat and stay. That room in Kangmin-jun had never been opened. Not once. Not to anyone. And he had told himself for 37 years that this was strength. He was wrong, but he would not understand that until October. The morning he received the diagnosis, he was eating breakfast alone, as he always did, in his kitchen. Soft tofu jjigae, barley rice, 2 pickled radishes arranged on a small plate with the precision of a man who finds order comforting. The same breakfast he had eaten for 20 years because routine was armor, and armor was survival. His private physician, Dr. Im Hyun-soo, arrived at 7:45. He sat across from Min-jun at the kitchen island. He did not touch the tea that had been placed in front of him. It has progressed faster than we anticipated. Min-jun set down his chopsticks. How long? It was not a question. It was the kind of sentence a man says when he already knows the answer will be the worst kind of honest, and framing it as a question would make it land differently, too sharply, too suddenly, and he needed it to land like something he had already accepted. 3 months, perhaps 4 if we begin aggressive treatment tomorrow, but given the location and the rate of spread. Dr. M stopped, looked at the island countertop, started again. I think you should begin to put your affairs in order. There was a silence that lasted perhaps 30 seconds and felt like a decade. Min-jun looked out the window, October gray pressing down on the city, like a hand. He looked at his celadon pieces arranged on the open shelf above the sink, 12 of them, each one a different shade of the same impossible green. Thank you, Hyun-sushi. That will be all. After the doctor left, he sat alone for 4 hours. He did not make calls. He did not summon his lieutenants. He did not begin the process of transitioning the organization, which he knew, with the cold rationality that governed most of his life, that he needed to begin immediately. He sat, and he looked at the celadon, and he thought for the first time in perhaps 30 years about a question he had been very carefully not asking himself. What had he missed? Not in business, not in the organization, not in the machinery of power he had spent his whole adult life tending, but in the human sense, the soft, ordinary, irreplaceable human sense. What had he never allowed himself to have? The answer, when it came, was so simple and so devastating that something in his chest cracked quietly open around it. He had never been known. He had built a life so deliberately sealed that not a single person on earth could say that honestly they knew who he was. His subordinates knew his reputation. His physician knew his blood work. His tailor knew his measurements. But no one knew him, not his fears, not the way he felt looking at early morning light on Celadon, not the thing he thought about at 4 a.m. when sleep would not come, not the boy who had once slept under a bridge and looked at the river and believed, in spite of all evidence, that he was going somewhere. He had protected that boy so completely that even he could no longer reach him. If this story is already landing somewhere deep inside you, you are not alone. Hit subscribe right now so you never miss a story like this. And please, do not leave. The part that will change everything is coming up next.
Min-jun entered Seoul-Mae Private Hospital on a Tuesday under a name that was not his own. He had arranged this weeks before, understanding that illness, like every other vulnerability, needed to be managed carefully. The room was on the 9th floor, a corner suite with a view of Buchan Mountain in the north. He had chosen it because on clear mornings, the mountain had a quality of light he remembered from his childhood, a time before the city had reshaped him into something he had not originally intended to become. He told his lieutenants he was in Tokyo. He executed a series of documents through his attorney. He told his housekeeper to water the orchids and not to call unless the building was on fire. He told no one where he actually was. He had made one decision in all of this that surprised even himself. He would not use the VIP floor. The VIP floor was where men like him were expected to go. Private dining, personal attendants, staff who were paid extra to ask nothing and see nothing. He had been there before, for minor procedures. It was efficient. It felt like an expensive hotel that smelled faintly of antiseptic. The staff looked through you with a particular kind of trained invisibility that he recognized as a mirror of his own. But for this last chapter, he did not want to be invisible. For once in his life, he wanted to be treated like a person. So he took the general wardroom, and on the first night, when the night shift nurse knocked at 10 p.m. to check his IV and vitals, he was not prepared for who walked through the door. She was perhaps 32, Nigerian, with deep brown skin and the particular bearing of someone who carries themselves with a calm that has been earned rather than assumed. Her name badge read Amara Osei, RN. She wore standard ward scrubs, her locks pulled back efficiently, and she moved through the room with the unhurried certainty of a woman who has been on her feet for 11 hours and has learned to be fully present anyway. She did not seem impressed by the size of his room. She did not seem intimidated by the way he watched her enter from the bed. She checked his monitor, reviewed his chart on her tablet, and said, "You haven't touched your dinner. Your blood sugar is going to drop by 2 a.m. if you don't eat something." Min Jun stared at her. In 22 years of running one of Seoul's most powerful organizations, no one had told him what to do. "I am not hungry." She made a small, practical sound that was neither dismissive nor particularly sympathetic, the sound of a woman who has heard this before and remains unmoved by it. "That's fine, but your body isn't asking permission. I'll have the kitchen send up some doyenjang-guk. You don't have to eat it, but it will be there." She wrote something on her tablet. She moved toward the door. "Nurse." She turned. Her expression was even, curious, entirely unafraid. "What is your name?" She pointed to her badge without any particular ceremony. He read it. Then, "Amara." "That's right." She paused at the doorframe, just briefly, and looked at him with the direct, uncluttered attention of someone who simply sees another human being without the particular wariness or flattery that people usually brought into his presence. "Try to sleep, Mr. Kang. At this stage, it helps more than anything else I can give you." Then she was gone. He ate the soup when it came. She worked Tuesday through Saturday nights. He had noticed this by the third day, noted it the way he noted everything, with the quiet, comprehensive attention that had kept him alive in a business where inattention killed you. And he had arranged, through the floor coordinator, with the kind of oblique authority that did not require explanation, that Nurse Osei be assigned to his ward for the duration of his stay. She came every night at 10. At first, the visits were clinical. She was professional and efficient and unhurried. She was not warm in the way that performance is warm. She did not lean in, did not use the softened voice that some medical staff adopt with terminal patients, like a costume they put on at the door. She was something far better than performed warmth. She was honest. It was in the second week that things began to change. She came at 10:15 one night to find him sitting up in bed with the bedside light on, holding a book he had not read a single word of in 3 hours. "You're not sleeping again." "I never sleep easily." She pulled the corner chair close to the bed, closer than was strictly required by any clinical protocol, and sat in it with the naturalness of a woman who has learned to not waste the rare moments of rest that a long shift offers. how long has that been true? Since I was a boy, perhaps. I am not sure I ever learned how. She considered this without rushing to fill the pause. My grandmother used to say that people who can't sleep are just people who haven't finished a conversation they started with themselves years ago. He looked at her. Your grandmother was perceptive. She was also loud, and she made the best jollof rice I've ever tasted. She was many things. He almost smiled. It was a near thing. Where are you from? Lagos. I came to Seoul 6 years ago. My aunt had been here for a decade, married to a Korean man. She told me the city would surprise me. Did it? Every day, in good ways and occasionally frustrating ones. He was quiet for a moment, then, surprising himself, I have never been to Lagos. I have barely left Korea in 15 years. Why? He thought about this. A simple question. He could not remember the last time someone had asked him something simple and waited for a real answer. Because everything I have built is here, and I was afraid that if I left it, even briefly, it would begin to fall apart without my weight on it. She tilted her head just slightly. That sounds exhausting. It is. Another pause, different from the ones before, warmer. I collect Celadon pottery, he said then, without planning to. I have for 20 years. There are 12 pieces in my apartment. I bought the first one from an old man in Insadong who told me it was Goryeo period. I don't know if that was true, but I believed him because I wanted to, and sometimes that is enough. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite classify. Not excitement, exactly, more like the specific interest of someone who's just caught a glimpse of an unexpected room inside a house they thought they understood. You seem like someone who decided a long time ago that he didn't need beautiful things. The sentence landed in him like a stone into still water. He did not answer immediately. He looked at the ceiling, the hospital ceiling, utterly ordinary, nothing to look at, and he thought, she is right. He decided that. When he was 17, when Wu pressed a Seiko watch in his hand, the first thing he had ever owned that was worth anything, and said, "You have arrived." He had arrived so completely, so deliberately, that he sealed the boy who was arriving inside the structure he'd built on top of him. And now he was dying, and the structure was still standing, and the boy had been in there for 36 years waiting for someone to notice. Amara had noticed. She had noticed in 5 minutes. Drop a comment right now. Has a complete stranger ever said something to you that reached a part of you that no one else had found? Tell me below. I read every single one. And do not go anywhere. We are just arriving at the part that will stay with you long after this video ends. By the 3rd week, he found himself watching the clock. This was entirely new. He had spent decades training himself out of impatience. Impatience made you act before the moment was right, and he had watched men destroy things they had spent years constructing because they could not wait 15 minutes for a situation to resolve itself. But this was not impatience. This was something softer and more ancient. He was waiting for someone the way you wait for rain in a long drought, with a quiet, unarguable need that does not embarrass itself by admitting what it is. She had begun bringing warm water in a thermos from the staff kitchen, not hospital water, the kind poured lukewarm from a dispenser, but properly heated water in a personal thermos that appeared on his bedside table without ceremony, without being asked for, without any mention of the fact that she had remembered he preferred it. The fact that she had remembered. The specific, unremarkable, completely devastating fact of being remembered. He had been feared for 30 years. He had been obeyed and respected and carefully avoided. He had never, in recent memory, been simply remembered in the small human way that says, "I noticed you, and I thought of you when you were not there." He did not know how to receive it. So he received it badly at first. Too formal, too clipped, keeping himself on the far side of the glass as always. but she was patient in the way that people are patient when they are not trying to be, when it is simply their nature. She did not press, she did not perform. She came each night, sat in her chair, and simply existed in the room with him, which was more than anyone had done for him and longer than he could say. They talked about everything. She told him about Lagos, the particular chaos of it, the way her mother's street smelled on rainy evenings, the vendor near her childhood home who sold chin-chin and called everyone by their mother's name as a form of respect. She told him about nursing school in Ibadan, about the hardest patient she had ever lost, about the way she had cried in a supply closet for 7 minutes and then gone back onto the ward because there were 9 other people who needed her, and grief had to wait. He told her things he had never told anyone. About a restaurant in Jeonju where he had eaten bibimbap once, 15 years ago, that was so perfectly made he had never gone back because he was afraid of ruining the memory with a lesser second experience. She laughed at that, not politely, not the careful laugh of someone in his presence, but genuinely, fully, leaning back in the chair with her whole body involved in it. That is the most irrational thing I have ever heard from a person who seemed rational. I know, I have never told anyone that before. The laughter softened. Why not? Because the people in my life would not understand it, and I found a long time ago that it is better to say nothing than to be misunderstood. That is a very lonely way to live, Mr. Kang. She said it without pity, without the clinical gentleness of someone trying to manage a difficult patient. She said it the way you say a true thing when you are tired enough that the careful distance between thought and speech has simply worn away. Yes, he said, it is. She did not try to console him out of it. She sat with it. She let the truth sit in the room between them and take up the space it deserved, and that, the specific, rare thing of being allowed to be sad without being rescued from it, undid something in him that he had been holding in place for 36 years. Slowly, then all at once, in the way that all the important things happen, Kang Min-jun began to fall in love with Amara Ose. He did not name it immediately. Men like him do not name things quickly, but he felt it, in the way the room was different when she was in it, in the way the night felt longer when she had gone, in the way her laugh had somehow become the thing he was keeping himself alive in order to hear. It was the 4th week when he told her the truth. Not all of it, not the specific truths that would have endangered her to know, but the shape, the true, undisguised, honest shape of the life he had built and the man he had become inside it. It was past midnight. She had finished her rounds and returned to his room in the way she had begun to return, not because her roster required it, but because the room had become, gradually and without either of them deciding it, the place where something real was happening. She sat beside him, not in the corner chair, beside him, close enough that he could hear her breathing, and he said, "I need to tell you something true about who I am." She looked at him and said nothing, waiting. "I am not a businessman, not in the way my paperwork describes. The life I have led, the decisions I have made, are not decisions that a good person would be comfortable knowing. I have, at various points in my life, been the reason for things happening that should not have happened, to people who perhaps did not deserve them." He stopped. She still did not speak. "I am telling you this not to confess and not to ask for forgiveness I haven't earned. I am telling you because you are the first person in a very long time who has looked at me as if I am a person rather than a position, and I find that I cannot continue receiving that from you under false pretenses." The room was quiet for a long time. He watched her face, the way she was thinking, actually thinking, not performing consideration, but doing it, turning something over in the careful hands of her mind. Then she set her thermos down on the bedside table, carefully, deliberately, as though placing down something she had been holding for a long time, and she said, "I'm not going to pretend what you told me doesn't matter. It does, and I'm not able to tell you it doesn't." He nodded. He had not expected otherwise. "But you are also a man lying in a hospital bed who was dying, and unless I'm very wrong about what I've seen in the last 3 weeks, you have probably never once in your life asked another person to simply be present with you." His jaw tightened, the precision of it. "I'm present," she said. "I can't offer you absolution, and I can't rewrite what you've done, but I am here, right now, in this room, and that is real." He looked at her for a long time, and then, quietly, without ceremony, in the plain dark of a hospital room in Seoul with monitors beeping softly and the city glowing far below, Kang Min-jin let himself be seen, fully, without the glass, for the first time. By the 5th week, the doctors had revised their timeline downward. The treatment had not done what they had hoped. His body, which had been so rigorously maintained, so carefully managed for so many years, was letting go with the quiet efficiency of a man who, once he has decided something is finished, finishes it completely. There was something almost like him in it. Even in this, he was thorough. He was not afraid. That surprised him. He had braced for fear the way you brace for a blow you know is coming, in advance with all your force directed toward the point of impact, but fear did not come. What came instead was a different thing, a deep, clear, almost unbearable sense of regret. Not for the specific choices, those were what they were, and he had made them with open eyes, but for time, for all the mornings he had stood at his penthouse window alone, looking at a city he had helped shape and never once thinking, "I am lonely." For all the years he had kept the boy under the bridge sealed safely inside the structure, unable to breathe. Amara knew. He could see it in the way she moved in his room now, more gently, with the specific quality of care that nurses carry when they understand that the work has entered its final phase. She had read it in his chart, and the numbers that speak a language only the trained can hear. She came that last night not at 10, but at 8, as soon as her shift allowed. She did not bring her tablet, she did not check his chart. She sat beside him in the way she now did, close, her presence warm and steady as a lantern, and said, "I know what the numbers say. I know." The room was dim, just the small bedside lamp and the soft glow of the monitors and the distant lights of Seoul pressing gently against the window like something trying to stay close. "Are you afraid?" "No." A pause. "Only of having spent my whole life inside myself." She reached out and took his hand. He had held hands before, in the technical, physical sense, but not like this, not in this specific way that is not about the touch itself, but about the intention behind it, the intention that says, "I am choosing to be here, with you, in this exact moment, not because it is required of me, but because you matter, and I want you to know it." He looked down at her hand holding his, her deep brown fingers against his pale, scarred ones. He thought about how strange it was that he had built an empire on the ability to read people and had somehow spent 53 years failing to understand the simplest thing, that being known by one person, truly known, was worth more than being feared by thousands. "Amara." "Yes?" "I am glad it was you, in this room, at the end of all of this." She was quiet for a moment, then, with the particular honesty that had been the first thing about her that reached him, "I'm glad it was me too." She had told herself for 3 weeks that what was happening in room 912 was simply good patient care, that the extra 20 minutes at the end of each shift, the thermos of warm water, the conversations that stretched past midnight, these were the natural consequences of working with a patient who was intelligent and isolated and navigating his own death without a single person who loved him. She had told herself that. She had believed it, mostly, right up until the night she realized she was thinking about him on her days off, not because she was reviewing his charts, not out of professional concern, but because something he had said was still sitting with her, about the restaurant in Jeonju, about the Celadon pottery, about not being misunderstood, and she found that she wanted to respond to it, that there were things she wanted to tell him, that the conversations did not feel finished when she left. She was 32 years old, and she had learned by now the difference between caring for someone and caring about them. She cared about Kang Min-jun. She could not fully explain what it was, this man who was not a good man and knew it, who had built his whole life around a lesson in not needing people, and arrived at the end of it devastated by the accuracy of his own teaching. There was something in him that she recognized, not the violence, not the power, but the loneliness underneath it, the specific loneliness of a person who has been exceptional at surviving and has forgotten what they were surviving for. She understood that. On the last night, the night the monitors started to show what they showed, she stayed. She did not go home when her shift ended. She sat in the chair beside his bed, and she held his hand in both of hers, and she talked to him about Lagos, about the way the morning light came through her childhood window, about the sound of rain on a zinc roof in August. She talked because she knew that hearing is the last sense to leave, and because she wanted the last thing he heard in this life that had been so much noise and so little music, to be someone speaking to him with love. He was drifting, in and out of the particular threshold state that comes near the end, when the boundary between sleep and the next thing begins to lose its definition. At some point in the small hours of the morning, he opened his eyes and looked at her, clearly, fully, with more presence than he had managed in days. He looked at her the way a man looks at the first true thing he has ever seen. "You stayed." She pressed his hand. "I stayed." He closed his eyes, but he did not let go of her hand, and for the first time in 53 years, Kang Min-jun slept. Not the brittle half-sleep of a man who was always listening for danger, not the vigilant rest of someone who has never allowed himself to be unconscious in the presence of another. He slept the way people sleep when they have finally, after a very long time, arrived somewhere safe. At 4:47 a.m., his monitors changed. At 4:52 a.m., they were still. She held his hand for a long time afterward. She did not call for anyone immediately. She sat in the dim, quiet room and held the hand of the man who had spent his whole life refusing to be held, and she said his name, his real name, the name she had learned from him in the 3rd week, the one that was not on any paperwork, once, quietly, the way you say a thing when you want someone to take it with you. 3 days after the funeral, a quiet thing, managed by men in dark suits who appeared and then disappeared like weather, a package arrived at the nursing station on the 9th floor of Seoul May Private Hospital, addressed to Nurse Amara Ose. Inside, wrapped in white silk, was a single piece of celadon pottery, small, roughly the size of both hands cupped together, the color of the sea at first light, that specific, almost impossible green that sits between gray and jade and belongs entirely to itself. There was a note written in a hand that was careful and slightly formal, as though the writer had drafted it more than once. "You asked me once if I still needed beautiful things. The answer is that I needed one. I found it late, but I found it. Thank you for being present, for making me want to be present too. Keep this somewhere it can catch the light." She stood at the nursing station for a long time, holding the celadon in both hands. It was lighter than she expected, and warm, which made no logical sense, which is why she noticed it. She thought about him, about the man under the bridge at 16, about the weight he had carried for 37 years because someone had told him that love made you weak. About all the mornings he had stood at his penthouse window alone, looking at a city he had helped shape and never once thinking, "I am lonely." For all the years he had kept the boy under the bridge sealed safely inside the structure, unable to breathe. Kang Min-jun lived 53 years in a world that rewarded iron and punished softness, and he was very good at the world he lived in. But the last 5 weeks of his life were the only 5 weeks in which he was truly, fully, irreversibly alive, because someone saw him, not the power, not the reputation, not the function, him. There is a kind of loneliness that does not announce itself, that hides inside achievement and discipline and the carefully maintained appearance of self-sufficiency, that looks from the outside like strength, that can live inside a person for decades before they find a quiet hospital room, a patient woman, a chair pulled close, and a hand reaching out. And the thing about that kind of loneliness is that it does not require a dramatic cure. It does not require grand gestures or declarations. It only requires one person willing to be present, simply, honestly, without agenda, and one person willing, finally, to be seen. He got to the end of his life and he understood something that had been waiting for him the whole time. The walls he built to protect himself were the very thing that kept him from being saved. And then someone came along who was not afraid of walls, and the walls came down. And it was enough, even at the end, even so late. It was enough. If this story moved you, subscribe right now so you never miss one like it, and leave me a comment. What part of this landed hardest? The walls he built? The moment she held his hand? Or the celadon on the windowsill? I write stories about people and the hidden things that drive them. I'll see you in the next one.